But now we're going to go into Afghanistan and Pakistan relationships. This is very fascinating. With us, we have a special guest, Faiysal Alikhan, fellow non-resident international security program at New America. So let's welcome Faiysal to the show. Welcome, Mr. Alikhan.
Thank you.
So this is a fascinating topic about Pakistan and Afghanistan relations. A lot of people don't always hear, at least in American media, don't always hear about Pakistan relations with Afghanistan. What can you tell us about this? Because you had a fabulous article the other day that I read.
Well, thank you. We've just had on the 11th of this month a quadrilateral meeting with the United States, with China, with Pakistan and Afghanistan with regard to the peace talks with the Taliban. And so I think this is also laying the groundwork for, as a pivot in the region, of some of the changes that are taking place and also a point of convergence between China and the United States, as well as with Iran in the region, for peace.
Let me ask you this. That's something I don't know people realize, but are there different types of Taliban, aren't there? There's the Taliban of the North Afghanistan area, and there's a Taliban inside Pakistan. Those are two different groups in a sense.
You're absolutely right. I think, when we originally started, there was one group which was like an umbrella for the Taliban. And now it's very, very fragmented with different groups which have various interests. Some of them have an interest of having political sort of ownership within Afghanistan. Others have a larger regional aspiration. Some of them are very tied in with this sort of narcotics and illicit trade. Some of them are tied in with some of these ISIS elements. So now it's very, very fragmented and very varied.
Does that make a problem for, obviously, it sounds like it's going to be a problem for the negotiations aspect?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that have hampered these negotiations is that last year we had talks that were facilitated by the government of Pakistan in Murray, where there were also observers from the United States government as well as from China. After which there was, it was found out that Mullah Omar, who was the supreme leader of the Taliban, had actually been, he had passed away 2 years before. And that led to sort of fight for who would be representing the Taliban and who they're speaking for. At the moment, there's a majority faction, and that's the faction that's trying to be brought on the table. And I think the thinking is that those who are reconcilable will be spoken with, and those who aren't will be eliminated.
Let me ask you this question, because I know I've read this before, and you're the expert here. The Taliban is really more concerned about the nationalism, correct? Getting everybody out of Afghanistan who doesn't belong there according to them, compared to like ISIL, who really just wants to create a caliphate around the world. But those are two totally different ideologies.
You're right. I mean, the Taliban have evolved a lot over the years. I mean, from being that sort of ragtag group that came in and took over Kabul in the mid 90s to after having, almost 2, 3 decades of war, a lot of the people who were probably in their 20s back then and now in their 50s, it's a very different thinking that they have. And yes, I mean, their feeling is that they want no outside interference and for them to have some sort of stake in government in the areas where they have a majority support. However, due to this sort of war economy that developed in the country and the fact that there have been so many external forces, there's a huge, huge sort of syndicated criminal enterprise, which sort of encompasses the drug trade, illegal timber, mining. And I think that's one of the things that destabilizes because of the relationships it has in the neighboring countries and the interest it has, which is more profit driven as opposed to political.
And that's what makes it such a problem. 'Cause I remember reading an article, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was in Helmand, where they were talking about talking to the locals, and a lot of the locals were saying, look, I make more money working for the Taliban than I do working in the regular economy. And that's a big problem.
Yes, I mean, they have almost 600,000 young people every year who come out of the universities and they're unable to be absorbed in the formal economy. There hasn't been much, I mean, apart from the war economy, which is now on a downturn, there hasn't been much in terms of local economy. It's things that the Afghan government has been looking towards, particularly with President Ghani and Dr. Abdullah's government now. Whereas in the informal economy, there seems to have been a lot of opportunity and they have an international reach, and it's something that's been very difficult to compete with.
Yeah, that's very tough. I know that I can't even imagine how you can overcome that. That's a difficult one. We're going to get more into the unique look at Afghanistan that we talked about earlier before the show. But what do you think about the relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan? Is it improving? Is it possible to even get them better?
I think one of the things that has happened is that, within Pakistan, we have now a consensus, particularly after the terrible attack at the APS, the Army Public School, where almost over 100 young students or children were killed. All the political parties in Pakistan, the Pakistani Army, all the different stakeholder groups are all united. There's no good and bad Taliban. They want to eliminate sort of terrorism, not only in our country, but also in the neighboring country. So there's a commitment which we've not seen before, and they've been acting upon it. Apart from that, with the Chinese pushing into the region and being a lot more aggressive with their economic interests, with Iran being much more of a regional player, and not to forget Russia and its historic role in this region, all of these external stakeholders have impacted the way that the two countries are now sort of looking at the areas of convergence more, and where are areas where we can sort of collaborate and find common ground as opposed to being on different sides.
Actually, you mentioned one that I was getting ready to ask you about too. You read my mind. In regards to Russia, it seems like they're putting their hands in a lot of different cookie jars, and now they've added Afghanistan. It seems like again. Have you heard anything about that?
Very much so. I mean, in Kabul, and I mean even in Mazar and some of the smaller cities, the Russians have maintained their presence, and particularly after the war that took place where the Soviet Union collapsed, they never left. And I mean, one of the things that has been very key when we were looking at withdrawal in Afghanistan, and there was a lot of talk about, as there has been, what happens once ISAF and troops from the United States leave? Who's going to fill the vacuum? People have talked of ISAF, people have talked of others. But I mean, the Russians never went anywhere and are still very much there. And as you know, they've had a very aggressive posture. And so I think they will continue to be a major actor in that region.
I'm not sure they have a different type of posture. I think it's usually aggression, isn't it? When it comes to Russia, they're not the softest of guys. I want to switch a little bit away from the political strategy and the military strategy and shift over to the humanitarian side, if I could. I saw a video, an interview of you a couple months ago. It was really intriguing about the Afghani people. Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on in the heads of the Afghani people right now in regards to everything that's going on around them, all the players that are involved, China and America? What are they feeling out there, if you can kind of summarize that?
I think there's two distinct points of view. There's a huge youth pool in the country with almost 60% of the people who are under 35 years old.
Wow.
These are people who've sort of grown up in a very different environment, have access to information, and particularly those who are centered around the largest cities have a very different view of how they see themselves and how they want to be projected. I mean, very similar to what younger people you'd find probably in other parts of the developing world. When you come to the rural areas, I mean, they're informed a lot by, we always say in these areas, people have 180-year frame. So they're looking at 100 years before what the experience has been, and as well as 20 years ahead. And for them, there's a lot of confusion that they see themselves as a pawn where there's no nation around it that really have their interests at stake, and so they're trying to see within this time what is the best. I mean, what is the best thing for them? Everybody wants peace after over 3 decades of war, and whoever is going to be able to provide that would be the right partner.
Now, are you from Afghanistan or Pakistan?
I belong to a district called Deir Ismail Khan, and we border on the tribal areas and border on Afghanistan. And so we've had a lot of interaction over the years, particularly with the large refugee population in Afghanistan, in Pakistan. And then I traveled quite frequently to Afghanistan. And as you know, I'm involved with this track 2 negotiation between the two countries at the moment.
Okay, so you're up in the northeast area, it sounds like.
Yes.
Excellent. I'll explain why I asked that in a little bit. I have a question for you. I'm starting to ask people. We're trying to do a special segment. You'll see in a little bit why I asked that. So the people there, I mean, I can't say appreciative, but do they like the idea of the American forces there? Does it make them feel safer towards the Taliban?
Well, it's quite divided. I mean, I think the American forces now, after a couple of tours, have realized, particularly with people in the South in the United States. I mean, when we talk about people, deeply religious, to some would say gun obsessed, very close sort of family values, suspicious of outsiders, and very protective about their freedoms. You'd actually see a lot of similarities in terms of mindset within certain parts of the United States and parts of Afghanistan. So in that respect, there's an understanding of the minds. I always see that if there was a U.S. military officer who comes in and he goes into a small village in Afghanistan, goes into a butcher shop and knows how to carve, the meat up, or can get under a tractor and can fix a tractor, it humanizes the experience. And then people look at that person and they're not just a robot or a Star Wars figure, but a human. And I think when they've had those human interactions, it's been very positive for both sides. So there are those who feel insecure and felt safer with having the presence of US troops in the area. Of course, there are parts of the countries who feel that once the US troops are gone, then there'd be an end to the conflict because there wouldn't really be anything to be fighting against. So I think it's two different sides depending on where you are in the country.
That's a fabulous point. In regards to the religion, you mentioned that a little bit. Obviously, I'm assuming the majority are Muslim. Are they
That's
Sunni?
there's a the majority would be a Sunni population, but there's also a sizable Shia population in the country.
Okay, it must be down in the south. Or...
Well, all over. I mean, we also have an Ismaili community up in the northeast. I mean, it's quite spread out. I mean, many of the minorities have actually been moving outside of Afghanistan and have moved into the Middle East, and some have moved to Canada and to other countries. When they saw this government coming in, a lot of younger people came back. They were inspired to be more involved. So you see some diversity in the various ministries. But for the most part, it's a Sunni-dominated country.
And you can tell me if I'm wrong here. I'm not really familiar with this area in the sense of I don't see or hear much, and maybe it's just because that's not what they want to cover here in the news, but I haven't read much either, that there's a lot of conflict between the Sunnis and the Shias there.
In Afghanistan, I mean, in Pakistan, we've had a fair amount with some would say, proxy wars fought by larger interests, which are now playing out into the region. In Afghanistan, it's been something which has not been the discrimination, I suppose, has been more in, within the militaries in terms of people that are taken in, or within various sort of government agencies, and has been less around the violence because with everything that's been going on there, this has been, I think, less of a priority area. Of course, if things are normal, they always say in our areas that when nothing is happening, then you're fighting against your cousin or your brother, and then if there's an external, then the three of you are fighting against them, and it goes so on and so forth. So I think there's been too much happening for us to see some of that.
Yeah, I just don't hear it as often as I hear it in some of the other countries. Did Bin Laden, the capture of Bin Laden, did that do anything at all? Did it impact? Did it weaken Taliban? Did it improve relations at all?
I mean, by the time he had been, taken out, it was the network had been weakened to a fair degree. I think there's one school of thought that believes that some of these younger people who are coming up within these violent non-state actor groups are a lot more hardline, than some of the older people. And so I think there's one thinking that feels that the older the people get within these leadership groups, the more room there is to negotiate with them because they have a different mindset. Whereas if you cut out these leaders, then there's always a next in kin and other people who take over, and they're much more hardline and much more further away from coming on the table. I think in his case, it didn't really have the kind of impact that people thought it would with regard to Al Qaeda.
And it didn't seem to work out the way they were hoping. You're right. Last question before we get to the humanitarian look at Afghani people. Is there any kind of influence at all or any threat by ISIS over there in Afghanistan or Pakistan?
It's something that's been emerging, particularly over the last year or so. In fact, there's been attacks just last week where the Pakistani consulate in Jalalabad was attacked, and ISIS was the one that took responsibility. There was some other attacks that took place in Pakistan again 2-3 days ago, and again Daesh or ISIS in Afghanistan were the ones who took responsibility. Last month, President Putin accused a couple of Afghan officials by name, saying that they were supporting ISIS against Russian interests in the region. So that was very confusing to a lot of people. So they have become active and they are trying to find some sort of grounds. At the moment, they're probably recruiting those who have no other place to go. And it's not a major problem at the moment, but it's something that's emerging.
Hopefully it does not become a major problem at all. All right, here's some fun questions for you. One of the questions I was always wondering, we've been kind of looking at the last week or two, what does a typical Afghanistan breakfast look like?
Well, there's this big sort of flatbread that you have in the morning, and it's normally served with sort of a curd or like a yogurt, and then there's a form of porridge, I suppose, which is like a barley mix with it, and then there's a tea with milk. This is what normally people have, and for those who have more, are more luxurious, would there'd probably be a spattering of eggs and dry fruit and some red beans.
Interesting. You always wondered what do other countries have for breakfast because we have cereal, which most countries don't seem to have it. The egg seems
Yeah.
to be a regular theme, that's for sure. But that's more for the people who have money, you say.
I mean, yes. I mean, and it's not as popular as people have them when they go to the small cafes and things, but so it doesn't seem to be something that's an everyday occurrence.
And in the cities of Afghanistan, the last question: what do they do for fun when their holy day is over? I guess it's Saturday night to Sunday, I think, for Muslims, if I'm correct.
Yes, it's actually very vibrant. I mean, even if you go to Herat or Mazar or Jalalabad, I mean, there are a lot of younger people out there. There are cafes. People play billiards or snooker. People are out playing backgammon or cards,
Oh,
and
backgammon!
having
Wow.
yes, and shisha. Music is something that's very popular. Traditional music and poetry. So you come across that a lot. Some of the younger urban, younger people, you have bands flying in from neighboring countries like Pakistan and others who come in, and there's a lot of music and art, cultural festivals, and then each particular region has different festivals throughout the year, normally with the seasons, and that's something that's very popular amongst people. So you see a lot more of that, now than you did in over the last few years when there was more trouble and conflict.
Fascinating, fascinating. Thank you so much again for that. Mr. Ali Khan, I know a lot of people are going to want to know more about you and your articles. I'm telling everybody, great articles to read. Where can we go?
Thank you very much. I mean, I'm on the New America website, but I'm also currently on a sabbatical at the Blavatnik School of Government at the University of Oxford. So that's another place where you could probably find me or follow me on Twitter at Faiysal Alikhan. So I look forward to being in touch with your audience.
Absolutely. And thank you again. He's actually all the way in Oxford, and I think it's almost 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night over there, if I'm correct.
Yes, just coming on 10 o'clock.
Well, thank you very much again for being on Therapy Cable Live. We truly appreciate it. We hope we can bring you back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Well, I was hoping that was a lot of fun. We learned a lot about Afghanistan, not just about the military and the political side, but we also learned about the people. What's going on out there? We learned about the breakfast and what they do for fun. I think it kind of brings more of a human side. This is a psychology show, isn't it? So I think it's kind of important for us to watch that.